Yes, I hope it is recording right now. We are today with Father Andrei Kordochkin, an archpriest and the rector of the Russian Church Cathedral in Madrid. He is very kindly agreed to share his time today to us. And let me see if it is recording. I hope it is the case. Uh, yes, seems to be. Right. So Father Andrei is the author of the book that was published when, Father Andrei? When was your book
Well,
published?
it came out about a year ago.
About a year ago. That's right. So, and what is the title of your book?
Well, the title has been offered by the publisher. It wasn't
Okay,
really
okay.
invented by me, and it's called uh, "To the Caesar, What Belongs to the Caesar?" with a question mark.
Right,
And
right.
the question is if a Christian is obliged to be a patriot. So I think that this has been maybe the first approach in the Russian Orthodox tradition to analyze the concept of patriotism within the uh, within the Christian doctrine. Because in America it has been done many times, and of course the big impact was the war in Vietnam and the figure of Martin Luther King, who of course was, well, like his followers, they were accused of not supporting the case of their state and not being patriots. And I think this was important because neither himself nor those who were involved into the anti-war movement, um, they did not reject the concept of patriotism as such, but they said that our disloyalty to the government and to the policy of the state is our form of patriotism. Then, of course, another important step was the war in Vietnam and the so-called Patriotic Act. And in the same way, uh, like it does happen in the history, when someone is being accused of not being a patriot, this is not really because he doesn't like his country, but if we find the correct definition of patriotism, well, the definition that I use in the book, which belongs to one of the American philosophers, is loyalty to the state. Now, any state expects loyalty of its citizens to some extent. United
Right.
States, Russia, France, any
Mhm.
state. But the level of this loyalty can be very different. Some some states can expect the citizens to be, well, law abiding, and maybe this is a limit to the loyalty. But a state which we would identify as a totalitarian state expects a greater level of loyalty, basically expecting that all the citizens, all their actions, all their thoughts, all their emotions are subject to the state and the authorities. So I think that in this sense, for example, uh, North Korea would require a greater degree of loyalty on behalf of its citizens, or in the same way the Soviet Union did. Now, I think in most societies, in most countries, people would define this loyalty to the state as something not only obligatory, but something that is good, something that is a virtue. And in the context of the Christian doctrine, we may ask, well, it is to what extent patriotism as a loyalty to the state that we belong to can be considered a virtue. And in the book, one of the epigraphs, yes, that I have, comes from the book of the French philosopher Albert Camus, when the book which is called Letters to a French Friend. And it's a kind of an imaginary dialogue between himself and the German patriot. And when they speak to each other, the question which is being raised is anything good? Is everything good and acceptable, which is meant to benefit the country, or is there any uh, moral, how should I say, moral border that a Christian cannot cross, even if he is meant to struggle for what is good for his country? But then again, if we think what is good for our country, now who defines it? It is usually the government. So once again, patriotism is a loyalty not only to the state as such, but also to the authorities. It's a kind of a civil virtue in a sense. So how does the Christian find his own position in this framework? This is really the question which is being raised in the book. So I have tried to make a journey with the reader beginning from the Gospel and the New Testament, trying to find various approaches to the state that we find in the New Testament. So, for example, one of the biblical scholars, Pilgrim, who's an American New Testament scholar, basically he finds three approaches within the New Testament. One, which is more about the submission, peaceful submission to the authorities that we find, for example, in the Pauline epistles. Another one would be sort of critical distancing. That's the expression that he uses, which we find in the Synoptic Gospels. And then the third approach he would find, for example, in the book of the Revelation of Apostle John, who doesn't really have anything good to say about the state, because he describes the state as a prostitute, as a beast, and as a Babylon. And there is no possible way that he sees a Christian submitting himself to the authorities of the state. So, I sort of tried to begin the journey with the reader from the New Testament, and then to come to the present day, and I tried to avoid suggesting any ready answers to the reader. I think that he should find his own answer.
How was your book received? How was what was the discussion? I understand that your book also ignited some discussion in Russia. Can you tell a little bit about this, if possible?
Well, I think that people tend to be more ignited these days by a photo in Instagram than by a book. But the book was, I think we were lucky enough to get an authorization for the book, which is the sort of part of the Russian church mechanism, which allows it to be sold in the church bookshops, for example.
Right.
But
right.
on the whole, I mean, there have been few articles. Some would be positive, some would be critical, but on the whole, I expected a more fierce kind of discussion. But so far, it has not come to pass. But I think that in a sense, maybe you heard about that in September, a group of Russian priests signed an open letter.
Yes, I did. Absolutely.
Well, I think there's a certain connection between the things that I discussed in the book and this open letter. Because in this open letter, when we speak about the justice in the courts, when we think about the violence, which is, in our view, unjustified in regards to the protesters and in regards to those who may become or have become political prisoners, I think by many people it would also be seen as not a patriotic act, as an act of betrayal in regards to the policy of the Russian government. But for a Christian, it's really how should I say? Well, Christianity, although it speaks a lot about sacrifice, and it speaks a lot about serving the other, but at the same, paradoxically, at the same time, it identifies the human person and the human soul as something that has an intrinsic and eternal value, which the state doesn't have. So, in a sense, a good, we cannot achieve something that is good for the state, losing our own soul and making a moral compromise. So this is really a way to see that the things that we speak about, that I spoke about in the book, is not something very abstract, but it's something to do with the political situation in Russia now and today.
Right. I think some of the reaction that I I noticed was that a priest should not get involved in any controversial activity, sort of in sense of you don't know who are those people, and you don't know whether they are guilty or whether they are not guilty. So, and that's kind of was something that I came across, that they try to say that priests should be apolitical and should not get involved with anything. But again, it's directly connected with what you mentioned with peaceful resistance, as with Martin Luther King, and so on. That's, you are bringing sort of uh, this kind of ideas into the Russian current discourse, right?
Well, yes, but if you want to move from Martin Luther King to the Byzantine discourse, for example, you could recall the figure of St. John Chrysostom, who was exiled from Constantinople because of his intercession for, well, this is one of the reasons, not the only one, of course, but his intercession for a family of a state functionary who was being persecuted by the empress. So now you may think, is it interference into politics, or is it something else?
All right, Saint Nicholas, who stopped.
Or Saint Nicholas, of course.
Right.
His famous episodes from his life when he is delivering delivering a person from punishment, which was unfair. So I think that the big mistake, which the church has done many times in the history, and I think that it is also a mistake which has been committed not only by the Orthodox, but, for example, in the Catholic Church, when earlier this year there has been a lot of discussion in regards to the reburial of Franco. So the church sort of tried to stay silent and kind of neutral, but I think that this is a big mistake, to think that being silent is being neutral. It is not. In Russia, we have a proverb, "Молчание знак согласия," which means that silence is a sign of approval.
Right.
So it would be very superficial to think that just by staying silent you remain neutral. Being silent basically is a way to agree and to accept. Right. And the real question, of course, we cannot convert ourselves into political figures, and we shouldn't be involved into the political struggle. But this doesn't necessarily mean that we always have to remain silent. This is one thing. And another thing, that when people say that the church should not be involved into politics, you can always ask two big questions. What is the church and what is politics? Because the church, in the sense, we're not just speaking about the priests and the bishops. This is the community of the church, and these people can occupy any position in the state, and they should react depending on, and their reaction should be defined by their faith. And in this sense, they can not just remain observing things. They have to act. And another thing, what do you really call politics? Because any active participation in the life of the country can be defined as political activity. It doesn't necessarily have to be a struggle for power. So are the Christians meant to be just observing the evil, which sometimes may accept institutional forms, or should they act?
Right.
This is the question.
What would you say? Sort of what recently has been working for me? It is when I would try to literally, as they say, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? And in this case, I cannot really analyze sort of all gospels right away, but I cannot see him I'm not finding sort of any references in gospels regarding his political activity. What would you say regarding this?
Well, the thing is that if you look at the gospel, my personal impression is that Jesus Christ, living in the time where he lived, and how should I say, he's not for the state. He is not against the state, but it seems like he doesn't really notice it. He always sees the person and the needs of the person more than the needs of the Roman Empire or of the Jewish people who are subjected to the Roman Empire. He always sees the needs of the person. This is one thing. And another thing, I think that if we look at the gospel, for example, at the parable of the Last Judgment or the parable of the rich man and the Lazarus, I think that the opposite of love in the New Testament is not hatred. The opposite of love is indifference. And this is really the situation. This is really this is the fundamental human choice. It is not whether he loves or whether he hates, but whether he loves and acts or whether he remains indifferent.
Well,
and Jesus Christ never remained indifferent. So we cannot always say what would he have done if he had lived in the United States in the 1960s or in Russia in 2000 something. But what we can know for sure is that he would never have remained indifferent to the human grief and to the human pain.
Yes, that was very powerful. This last part, you really made my first day of the year. Thank you very much, Father Andrei. A lot of food for my thought, and especially this line about being indifferent. So you kind of, it just caught my how to say heart. Thank you very much for.
Thank you, Father Andrei, and I wish to all those who listen to your channel a very happy New Year, full of the blessings of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Thank you, and I hope we will talk again. Thank you, Atya.
For sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.